Good afternoon and welcome to the Lunchtime series with me, Britz, leading the charge with insights, information, ultimately effective results. Joining me in today's marketing and leadership segment, marketing and communications expert and co-host Craig Page-Lee. How are you doing, Craig?
Kevin, I'm great, thanks. Hope you're doing well. Good to be chatting today. And I know you're still quite busy. I guess you've just told me that you are wrapping up soon and have some exciting travel adventures in place.
Yes, so we've had some travel in a bucket list of things we want to do, and so we are leaving on the 17th of December. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Fantastic.
But yeah, it's going to be. We were just talking now about just some rest and relief. Craig, you're also feeling
Yes.
overwhelmed and tired.
Lots. It's been a busy year. Lots of project work. So yeah, good R&R. That's exactly what's in store.
Craig, so I recall that we're continuing on from last week's conversation around the dichotomy of leadership, right?
Yes, Kevin, absolutely. So we had quite an interesting chat last week where we covered the first two themes of the book titled The Dichotomy of Leadership. And today we're going to review the final theme titled Balancing Yourself. And then I've also pulled a few important facts from, we referenced two other similar books last week, both focusing on US Navy SEALs team members who are now in senior leadership roles or running leadership consultancy. So I want to pull a couple of those pointers as well from one of the books. And then just a reminder, Kevin, the Dichotomy of Leadership was written by Jocko, Willink and Leif, Babin. And the book summary was produced by Paul Miners. Both authors are ex-Navy SEALs and both operate in the field of leadership, public speaking, and executive coaching.
Craig, and those three themes that we spoke about specifically.
Okay, yeah, Kevin. So just to note the three themes. Gosh, that's a bit of a tongue twister. The first two that we covered was theme one, balancing people. The second was balancing the mission. And then the focus for today's conversation is the third theme, which is balancing yourself. And there's some really wonderful takeouts in this, but some really simple pointers that we've actually addressed in various conversations. And it's just so nice to see them reiterated in this particular form based on Navy SEAL's point of view, Kevin. So looking at theme 3, balancing yourself, the first point we note is that effective leadership requires an individual to be both a leader and a follower. And interestingly, this is referenced as one of the toughest dichotomies of a leader, Kevin. And you probably can talk well to this particular point based on the work that you do with leaders. But here we note that in order to be a good leader, ready to take charge and make crucial calls for the good of the team and mission, you must also be a good follower. Being a good follower strengthens your leadership in the eyes of the team, especially as it demonstrates that when you don't have all the answers, you're definitely able to lean on the expertise and ideas of others, which in turn helps accomplish the mission. And a key point highlighted in this theme, Kevin, is that failing to follow lawful orders also creates antagonistic relationships, which negatively impacts the willingness of a leader or boss to take input and suggestions from subordinate leaders. And we know that there's often a lot of pressure placed on team members to actually act irresponsibly and behave in unethical ways in organizations. And it's a really key point here. But an example of this in modern business is that many junior leaders compromise their relationships with their senior bosses in the way that they speak, the way they act, failing to actually work as followers. And the learning here is that great follower takes ownership of their own mistakes, builds trust with their boss, and demonstrates through actions how they actually plan to improve, Kevin.
Craig, what's interesting about this point, and I think it's a significant one, but interestingly enough, very often leaders almost give the idea that because you need to become a follower, because you're not necessarily the smartest person in the room all the time. Sometimes because your ego gets in the way, it's difficult to be a follower of someone else's good idea. But a really great leader has wonderful ability at kind of going, well, okay, cool. Like if this is a whole new direction, if you think this can work, let's do the homework for it and let's put it together and make it happen.
Yes.
And a really good leader doesn't allow for the ego to kind of get out of whack and kind of go, it's not just about me, it's about what's good for what we're trying to achieve.
Correct.
it's a good indicator of what good leadership could be like. So I love that.
Absolutely. Kevin, the second point of this third theme is plan, but don't overplan. Again, another really important yet simple point to understand. So the dichotomy for strategic leaders on this point is that you cannot plan for every contingency. However, you should not dismiss likely threats or problems that could arise and derail the business or mission at the end of the day. And we all know that planning is critical, and failing to mitigate risks and not prepare for likely contingencies will definitely set up your team for failure. On the other hand, Kevin, over planning obviously can create many more challenges, distracting the team, slowing them down, and really meddling in the way to accomplish the mission and the goals at hand. The key learning here for me is that the most effective teams build flexible plans, preparing at least 3 or 4 more probable contingencies along with worst case scenarios. An example of this in modern business is that while rapid expansion companies often do embrace risks in order to grow, they inevitably do get caught up with ambitious plans, and they often fail to mitigate these risks. Predominantly the risks that they control, like putting jobs, careers, capital, strategic initiatives, and long-term success at stake.
Craig, I mean, what I like about this is, plan but don't overplan.
Yeah.
It leads to the adage, action creates motion, right? So, if there's consistent action and you're taking action to what it is you're doing next, right? Essentially, that's in itself creating some kind of motion. But over planning sometimes leads to people stop working. People stop working. Procrastinate, because then the plan gets technical, or they haven't thought of every single little item that needs to happen, and you kind of go, okay, well, now it's getting to procrastination. That's not useful to anyone. So I think it's valuable. Yeah.
Absolutely. Kevin, then the third point of theme 3 here is humble, not. And again, the dichotomy for leaders on this particular point is that leaders must be humble enough, be open to new ideas and better tactics and strategies, but also be ready to stand firm when facing issues that negatively impact the mission and the team. The highlight point here is that humility is the most in a leader, which, as we know, requires an individual to not only check their ego, very strong word that you've just spoken about, but actually to accept constructive criticism and take ownership for their mistakes. It also means that understanding the importance of strategic direction from your boss and accepting that you don't have all the answers. Being too humble or passive, however, can be disastrous, especially when a strategy coming from superiors will almost certainly endanger the team or harm the strategic mission. And a simple example of this in modern business is that a subordinate leader must carefully prioritize when to push back, or their concerns might be taken seriously when they truly matter, ultimately putting the team at risk. So I should say that their concerns may not be taken seriously when they really matter, Kevin. And likewise, here, CEOs really need to seek feedback and address those concerns of the key leaders, encouraging department heads to voice their opinions and obviously to express their disagreements in an open and constructive forum.
Craig, what's beautiful about this is, I think this is an obvious, very significant reference to, there's a difference between having a title and being a leader. And leadership is a skill. And if it were a skill, humility is easy, right?
Yes.
Because then it becomes the skill of leadership. But when you're moving in that realm of being entitled, the title, there's no humble there. Ego is the first thing that comes to play. So when you as a well-equipped leader, you realize that leadership is an actual skill. It's not a title. And it speaks specifically to being humble, just coming with humility.
Yes, absolutely. Kevin, the fourth and final point of theme 3 is focused but detached. So there's a really interesting sort of flipping of concepts here. So the dichotomy for leaders on this point is that they become quite overwhelmed by the minor details and remain too detached from the primary details, inevitably losing control and inevitably failing on the overall mission's objectives. The key learning for me here is that effective leaders are detached in a position where they can see strategically the bigger picture. And while all leaders must be attentive to the details, getting sucked into the minutiae of those details of planning and approval processes means struggling to lead and support their teams. And exactly as you said earlier on, getting caught in the mud, you're shifting focus from leading the team and you're getting caught in the technicalities of the things surrounding you. I think a simple resolve here is just definitely to clear our time in diaries for headspace to really refresh and recalibrate and visit those disruptions, recognize what the mission's core priorities are, recalibrate and start again.
Craig, what's interesting about that, this is, Dr. Tara Swart is, she's the neuroscientist that does the MIT's Neuroscience for Business program. And she, right. She does an interview on one of the podcasts that I follow. And in this, she actually mentions that thinking is an activity. We often don't think of thinking as an activity. And you're actually burning fuel. You're literally burning calories by sitting down and thinking. So, when you realize that you've got to focus but detach, and you've got to take some time out to think through the process, right? And you really got to focus and hone that skill. And there's the whole, other science that's called flow, and I'm sure you know about stepping into flow. And there's ways to do that, But I think it speaks really well to enabling this fourth point around focus but detached.
And it's important to recalibrate, to revisit the core objectives, understand if you're going off track. Maybe it's purposeful and the correct approach at that particular point in mind, but in time. But you've got to be able to come back on track and really understand what the core priorities are and how you and the team are going to move forward in that particular direction.
Yeah, Craig. So, last week you mentioned that the two other books that were also written by the Navy SEALs. What learnings can you share with the listeners around that?
Okay, Kevin. So, yes, the two books that I referenced last week as extra leadership reference directly to this conversation is the first book titled Extreme Ownership: How U.S. Navy SEALs Lead and Win. Now, interestingly, I didn't realize this until doing some further research on the book. This actually was the precursor book to the one we're covering now. It was written by Jocko, Willink and Leif Babin. And then the second book, which is titled Never Enough, a Navy SEAL Commander's 3 Pillars of Authentic Leadership. This is the book that was written by Mark Hayes, also a former commanding officer in Navy SEAL 2. And I want to specifically look at the second book, Never Enough, and pick up on some of the leadership lessons gained from this particular book for the remainder of the show, Kevin. The content of the book is reviewed in detail in a really interesting article written by Brent Gleason, who's a contributing editor to Forbes magazine. Interestingly, and this is why he was, I genuinely believe, able to articulate the book so effectively, is he also was a former Navy SEAL. The article was published on the 10th of December 2021 and can be found on Forbes.com. So, Kevin, from the article, which, again, just to reemphasize, focuses on the book Never Enough, a Navy SEAL Commander's 3 Pillars of Authentic Leadership, we start by noting the 3 pillars that the book is structured around. The first is excellence, the second pillar is agility, and the third pillar is meaning. And each of these pillars is broken into about 3 fundamental supporting principles, which are highlighted in the book. So let's take a look at these 3 pillars in a bit more detail, Kevin. Starting with pillar 1, never excellent enough. A really strong statement that the opening point on this pillar is that on an individual level, we must look to be never excellent enough. We must build our own capabilities in terms of knowledge and capacity, strength and control, and our accountability and orientation. So in support of that first pillar, our first principle is choose the hard path. So the key takeaway from this point is that effective leaders push themselves and their teams to choose the hard path, which doesn't mean working hard simply for the sake of working hard, but rather focusing on outcomes, not outputs. And it definitely doesn't mean taking risks at the sake of your team or your organization's values, Kevin.
Craig, I just want to mention that, it's one of the values that I hold is growth. It's something that I'm always constantly seeking out. And at the moment, when I'm not working, I'm doing, a certification as a neuroscience practitioner. So
yes.
It's all about the never enough kind of approach. But what's important to me, and I think it's a significant point about it, is striving for continuous growth around, who you are and what value you can bring to an environment. So I absolutely love that. And I know that's something you also quite passionate about.
Yes.
You're constantly learning. And then choose the hard path, Craig. What's interesting about this is I in a training capacity one day, I was speaking about your comfort zone. And, as wonderful words of wisdom just flowed out of my head kind of thing, the one thing I shared with people was what we don't realize is the degree of your discomfort is the degree of your learning. And, when you choose the hard path, we think it's uncomfortable. We don't like being there. It's usually out of our comfort zone. But what we don't recognize very often is the degree of the difficulty, the degree of how hard it is the degree of the learning you're getting from that process. So I always, people like Anthony Robbins, for example, say, if you're living in your comfort zone, you're dead. So he's quite blatant about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin, we do know that there are people who are just absolutely happy in the jobbing role, in focusing on outputs as opposed to outcomes. And there's some positions in organizations that really just need that kind of individual. Not everyone is striving to be a leader. Not everyone has the capacity and the skill and capability to be a leader. But when you are in that role, you really need to understand that it's working hard and focusing, at least not just about working hard, but on those outcomes, most definitely.
And Craig, just to add to that, and I think that's what makes a great business great is, some people want to be those people and some people don't want to be those people, and recognize who's playing at their strengths and who's playing at the game in the right way. Because if you're using people at their strengths, they're going to flourish and you're going to get the best out of it. That is, having great leadership skill. Forcing someone to become a leader based on the fact that they do a job well is maybe the worst thing to do for that individual.
Correct. No, good point. So Kevin, the second supporting principle here is build comfort with discomfort. I thought I can see the smile in your face. I thought you'd appreciate this. So the key takeaway from this point is that through continually improving our emotional intelligence, we can definitely enhance our self-awareness and control our emotions in the most arduous of circumstances. However, the more actively we pursue the fine art of comfort zone expansion, the more we and our teams gain the strength and foresight to navigate diversity. So an interesting concept, that.
Yeah, and it lends itself to the whole COVID conversation that we had a few years ago already. Is because life is so fiercely changing consistently, it's also seeking the uncertainty or the certainty inside the uncertainty. And when you suddenly realize it from that position, you kind of go, well, you can be certain that you don't have certainty about how things are going to play out. So it's, absolutely. I mean, the comfort within the discomfort, important.
But I really like your reference to COVID there, because that definitely was a almost forceful way that people had to pursue the fine art of comfort zone expansion and get to that point of understanding how to navigate diversity at the end of the day.
But also, Craig, what's beautiful about the building comfort with discomfort is we often don't believe that we are able to achieve the things we set out to achieve. Yet COVID happened and people came up with intervention and solution in a way that they'd never done in the history of the planet. And suddenly you go, okay, well, now you don't have excuses, because now we have evidence to prove that you're very capable of coming up with solutions. I remember speaking to the dean of the Pretoria of University of Pretoria, and one of his conversations with me was their trajectory was to get to being online over the next 2 years. And they did it in something like 11 days.
Wow.
It was a ridiculous sort of comparison he made. And I was like, well, there we go. When you kind of go, we're supposed to get online with all our stuff, and suddenly COVID happens, you get really uncomfortable and you now have to get comfortable with the discomfort. Suddenly you solve in ways that so people, and that's why I'm so passionate about what I do, is because people will always surprise you on how well they do what.
Kevin, you're going to really appreciate the third supporting principle, because this is incredible confidence and extreme humility. And the important duality of leadership is that we must embrace all aspects of life. And this requires both incredible confidence and the humility to balance it at the end of the day, often at the same time, actually. And you have to think slow and fast. You have to serve others before yourself, and you have to apply feedback for making continual improvements. So, a really meaningful supporting principle, that one, Kevin.
Great. One of these things that I want to just reference, which I absolutely love, Brené Brown speaks about the man in the arena. And she speaks about, getting feedback. And one of the things she says is, if you're not willing to stand next to me and get your ass kicked with me in this arena, I absolutely am not interested in your feedback.
Yes.
Right. And, it speaks to that incredible confidence, because, the confidence to have a podcast, the confidence to write a book, the confidence to pitch to your clients, the confidence you have to just put it out there and, lead with that, in the face of fear, because people might just say, I think that's a hideous idea and I think that's terrible, but they might not, right? We currently, yes. You and I, we're not TV producers, but we're currently writing a TV show, and you kind of go, well, I'm confidently willing to fail at it, and and through that, with extreme humility, learn how to do it better.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're doing it, we're making it happen. So beautiful point.
Kevin, the second pillar here is never agile enough. And the key takeaway from this point is that on a team and organizational level, we must aim to be never agile enough and understand how to shift between these roles to best serve, firstly, our missions, how to put the systems in place to lead superior decision making, and then obviously how to keep our teams as nimble and flexible and responsive as possible, Kevin. The first supporting principle to this pillar is know when to lead and when to follow. Again, one of the important things I believe that really, when demonstrated correctly, shows what true leadership is. As referenced earlier, it's an important aspect of leadership, especially in relation to the three questions of knowing. Firstly, when do I lead from the front? When do I lead from the rear? And when do I actually set the vision, but then get out of the way so that the team can continue and deliver on that vision? And the key takeout for this point here is that in an organization, a culture of accountability actually starts at the top. And the more you hurt, the less. In high performance teams, hierarchy doesn't and shouldn't always matter. However, hierarchy must never stand in the way of the best decisions being made or appropriate actions being taken to achieve that desired end point.
What's interesting about this, I have a measurement system for
this. Oh, wow.
When you know, and it's purely based on human behavior, when you have the feeling of anger, right, you know that you're not agile enough. Because if it triggers you to a position of anger, you might not be agile enough. Because usually anger is a wonderful indicator of this is not going my way, right? And as a leader, if you are triggered to anger to that degree, you can get angry, that's fine, may not be useful though.
Yes.
But the recognition of anger gives you a wonderful, beautiful indicator of you're not agile enough in this process. So anger is a good way to measure whether you're agile enough or not.
And if the anger is not in place, which means you are agile, you'll be able to set that vision and then step out of the way to be a guide on the side and let the team continue on that journey.
Usually anger is a debilitator.
Yeah, absolutely, Kevin. Yes, yeah.
Anger debilitates the process. It debilitates what's my next thinking process. I mean, when your brain is in a state of anger, you are not able to think clearly. Your brain can't do the same thing, right? At the same, two things at the same time. It literally is going through anger.
That's a wonderful segue into the second supporting principle, which is actually learn how to think, not what to think.
Yes.
So how we learn that leaders must have the agility in the decisions they make, with strong leaders demonstrating that they have the ability to jump from one role to another, one industry to another, and even from one organization to another. And the point that resonates with me the most here, Kevin, is that it's not simply about gaining knowledge in a given area of expertise, but actually having a system and process for decision making, for gathering the broadest range of inputs possible, and then knowing when to make that decision. You and your team organization's values should be reflected in every decision you make. Important endpoint on the second supporting principle.
Yeah, Craig, and learn how to think. It's a human thing, right? And if you look at leadership, the conversation around leadership worldwide, and you can look at very well publications that are actually speaking about this. And because of AI and the influx of AI, we need to be able to think better. And it really chimes into the Wings principles of creativity, critical thinking, social intelligence, aspects and constructs that you cannot get away with. From being a great leader. Thinking is or how to think, unbelievably important.
The third supporting principle to pillar 2 is gain authority by giving it away. And a point that we've covered a number of times previously is that one of the best ways to actually attract, develop, and retain top talent is by creating a cultural environment of diversity, creativity, and autonomy. And Kevin, in the highest performing organizations, what we learn here is that the core functions of the leader are to set the vision, articulate the mission and desired outcomes, and then to create more leaders, something that you and I believe very strongly on. Effective leaders push credit out to the team and take note they own the blame. Really a great statement, that.
Yeah, and it just comes back to that, when you've got a bunch of leaders, or if you've surrounded yourself with a bunch of leaders, it means you have less to worry about,
Yes.
And there's more thinking capacity in the room than if you were just doing it yourself. It's a no-brainer for me.
So Kevin, the third pillar referenced in the article, or the article covering the book, is titled Never Meaningful Enough. And the key takeaway from this point is that on an impact level, we must act to be never meaningful enough, knowing that we will make the biggest difference for the people in our lives and in our communities, and potentially even on a larger scale. And the first supporting principle to this particular pillar is push your values out into the world. The article reaffirms that authentic leaders first find their purpose and clearly define their set of values and guiding principles before imparting their beliefs on others. Probably the most important statement in the entire conversation we're having today for me.
Yeah, pushing your values out into the world. I've never heard it put into that context before. And I think that is a significant frame for.
It's beautiful.
It's just unbelievable.
The second supporting principle is live and die for people, not causes. And I found this quite interesting. I had to stop and think about this carefully. The principle opens with the statement, be intrusive in people's lives. And again, it just, it sort of came across as a negative connotation, but it doesn't mean that we have to overstep the boundaries. We don't need to make people uncomfortable. We don't need to push past the point of politeness in our intentions. This is more about reframing the concept of intrusion as something that's critically necessary to actually have meaningful relationships. And we must be willing to intrude. We must be willing to ask the hard questions and to have the hard conversations. Otherwise, we're not really making a difference, Kevin, both in our personal lives, in our relationships with family, colleagues, and in the work that we do, Kevin.
Also, Craig, just on that point, is sometimes when we don't intrude and we don't have the difficult conversations, people sometimes think we don't care.
Yes.
Right? So when you stay away and you steer away from the difficult conversations, some people, consider that, well, you don't really care about it in any case. So let's just talk about it. So it makes sense.
Kevin, the final supporting principle is make differences where they will count the most. Again, another great statement. And here we acknowledge that we inherently strive to find meaning in what we do, and we all want to know that the things we do make a difference, whatever the impact, whether large or small. And the key learning here is that as a leader, it's even harder to engage every member of a team in the purpose of the organization. Leaders, therefore, have to prioritize their time and energy where they have the most impact and the influence is greatest. When they do that, the team will follow. That's a given. And yeah, those are the key points from the second article, Kevin.
Fantastic. Greg, I love that, making a difference where it counts. And that's usually, not usually, but very often around people, I find,
Yeah, very much so.
Do it around people. It's a fantastic conversation, Craig, and I think one well worth unpacking for 2 weeks already. It's the Dichotomy of Leadership, and the links and all the information will be in the description boxes below. But a quote that I got for us today, Craig, comes from John C. Maxwell. The best leaders are those most interested in surrounding themselves with assistants and associates smarter than they are. And that's from John C. Maxwell.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah.
So yeah, Kevin, next week's our first show for December 2024. We've got 2 shows and then we wrap the year up, and we're picking up again on the topic of marketing and communications for the month of December, or at least for the last 2 shows in December.
Yes, and it's going to be what, 188th or 89th show already.
Yeah, it'll be about 187, 188 when we wrap the year up.
Fantastic, I love it. Craig, thank you for today. Thanks for the insights. Please remember to like and share, and tune into the Lunchtime series every Wednesday and Thursday. For myself and Craig, have a fantastic week. Craig, I'll chat to you soon.
Kevin, great. Have an awesome week ahead.
Cheers, bye.